Hello. So, my opponent maintains that closed book testing is necessary to keep our student population, in essence, sharp mentally. I'll begin with their off-case argument, their disadvantage. Requiring all educational testing to be open book will decrease aptitude within the nation and lead to lower GDP. Subpoint A. Closed book testing leads an individual to perform better in school. There's subpoint 1. A study done by the National Library of Medicine explored the results of closed versus open book testing in university. There were better results for the closed book group in a test in the 8th week and in the final exam than there were for the open book group. Now, to this, I have two responses. The study my opponent is citing only includes 2 college courses with 46 students showing up to the first quiz and 51 to the second quiz. The sample size is too small, and more research is needed to make definitive statements for legislation that could span the entire United States. Secondly, my opponent's argument is that requiring educational testing to be open book will decrease aptitude within the nation and lead to lower GDP due to his claim that closed book testing leads an individual to perform better in school. However, he fails to make clear how exactly performance in school is a good measure of overall aptitude in life and exactly how closed book testing will lead to a better GDP. His claims are unsubstantiated, and the one study he mentions has a sample size of about 100 compared to the millions in the United States. Now, for his on-case arguments. My original argument was that closed book testing is outdated. Information can now be retrieved at lightning speeds with the internet. To this, my opponent replied, Google is not as quick as you think because of the need to sort between credible and non-credible information. My opponent then cites Wikipedia as an example of a non-credible source that anyone online can edit. Now, everyone knows that Wikipedia is not a reliable source of information. This is a basic fact I myself learned in 4th grade in school. Everybody understands that Wikipedia is not admissible as a credible source in any educational setting. So that is a weak, very weak example. Next, also according to my opponent, a Stanford study suggested students are not good at sorting information online. It said that just because they're savvy with social media does not mean they're good at sorting information well and being discerning. Now, I would argue that this is not a failing on the part of the student, but rather a failing on the part of the school system. Our schools need to be preparing students to face the cultural context in which they exist, and newsflash, the internet exists and it is useful. In this age, we need to be able to navigate it well and effectively. Therefore, perhaps it is our school systems that need to be refined so that our students can navigate the internet safely and with an ability to easily find credible information. Our students' current inability to successfully use the internet does not mean we should give up trying. The internet is infinitely valuable and we cannot let it go to waste. Next, my original argument was that closed book testing was preparing us for a closed book world, and that with open books per se now in our pockets 24/7, our tests should reflect that. Having closed book tests only adds stress. Now, to this my opponent responds that the open books in our pockets 24/7 are the source of stress. He cites a study saying social media and mobile devices may lead to psychological and physical issues such as eye strain and difficulty focusing on important tasks. The source also states that they may also contribute to depression. In addition, the study states that the overuse of technology may have a more significant impact on developing children and teenagers. Now, in cross-examination, I asked my opponent if his source controlled for how the technology was being used, seeing as he specifically said, and I quote, social media and mobile devices may lead to psychological and physical issues. Now, of course, I am not arguing for the increased use of social media. I am arguing for us to utilize the internet as the educational powerhouse it truly is. I asked if his study researched whether the use of social media had different effects than the using the internet for educational purposes, which is what I'm arguing for. However, to my question, he answered in direct contradiction to what he initially said in the video, that the source study was for the general use of technology and its effects on an individual. Whether screen time was for educational purposes or non-educational purposes, the fact remains the same that a closed book testing environment would help prevent these issues described. Again, this is actually in direct contradiction to what he initially said in his video. He specifically said then that the study explored social media in specific and technology's effects on students, not merely technology in general, which, yes, using the internet for educational means would fall under. However, his response to my cross-examination stated that the source study was for the general usage of technology, when in his initial video he explicitly states it researched social media. Therefore, this source is shady at best and not applicable to the issue of technology's usage in education. It's irrelevant to the matter at hand because I'm not arguing about social media. Next, in response to my statement that cheating is widespread, my opponent cites an article from collegemarker.com, which is a resource for finding colleges in Karnataka, a state in southwest India, in which a man named David Callahan, who has no obvious credentials at all, argues that the reason why college students cheat is because they are, quote-unquote, pressed for time, and that students resort to cheating due to a lack of time. When I asked my opponent in cross-examination whether or not removing the need to study long hours for a closed book test would ameliorate the specific issue of being pressed for time, he dodged around my question by saying long hours is ambiguous. Now, I think I am perfectly clear in what I mean. One needs to study much longer for a closed book test than they do an open book test. Therefore, removing the need to study for a closed book test removes the issue of being pressed for time that spurs students to cheat that my opponent cites. Therefore, his argument is weak and, as a matter of fact, is actually solved by my approach to things, which is implementing open book testing in education. Now, lastly, my original argument was that information can now be retrieved at lightning speeds. It is more advantageous to be able to find a lot of information with technology than it is to be able to memorize less information. My opponent then says that it is not always advantageous to retrieve a lot of information online than to be able to memorize smaller amounts of information, citing an example of the need to be able to do CPR. Not only does my opponent take low-hanging fruit, he also constructs a classic strawman fallacy by saying, I believe that it is fine to Google how to do CPR in the moment rather than truly learn it. The example my opponent gives is that he would be distraught if his child died because a teacher didn't memorize CPR. Clearly, I do not want children to die. And the straw man is in accusing me of thinking that open book testing in education means that open book testing should also apply to CPR. Now, to me, educational testing refers to elementary schools, high schools, colleges, and universities. Teachers do not learn CPR in university. CPR training happens in independent programs, for example, from the Red Cross. Therefore, the legislation I would want to implement would have nothing to do with that. Now, clearly the strawman fallacy he constructed has been deconstructed. Thank you.